Can you hear? Sound check. Sound check 1, 2. Sound check.
Good morning, everyone. We will now call the 29th convention of the ILWU Local 142 back to order. Could we please have the election buddy launch the vote for roll call, please? Thank you. Next on the agenda, we will have video guest speakers. First one is Maisie Hirono, United States Senator from Hawaii. We are pleased to show a video from Senator Maisie Hirono, who is excited to address the delegates at our 29th Local 142 convention. Senator Maisie Hirono is currently the junior United States Senator who serves on the Committee on the Judiciary Committee on Armed Forces, Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, Committee on Veteran Affairs, and Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship. Senator Maisie Hirono has had a long career of serving the people of Hawaii. She started off as a member of the State House of Representatives in 1980 and became Hawaii's first Japanese immigrant lieutenant governor in 1994. Though she was unsuccessful in her bid for governor in 2002, Maisie was elected to Congress in 2006 and then to the United States Senate in 2012, where she has served to today. The ILWU Local 142 has also been a strong supporter of Senator Maisie Hirono. Please take a moment to hear what she has to say.
Aloha, ILWU Local 142. This is Senator Maisie Hirono. Thank you for inviting me to speak to all of you at your 29th convention, and a special mahalo to the team putting together this gathering. Your convention's theme takes on particular relevance this year: unity, solidarity, and resilience. I want to acknowledge the strength and resiliency that everyone at ILWU Local 142 has shown throughout the pandemic. I know it has not been easy. While I wish we could all be together in person, at least we can all still gather. This pandemic has impacted every part of our lives, including how we interact with each other. It has also exposed fundamental inequities that exist in our workplaces and in society. Many people were furloughed or lost their jobs. For those who were required or able to work, they did not always have a say in what, if any, protections were put in place against COVID-19. Some weren't allowed to use sick leave when they really needed to take care of themselves or their family. Even now, parents don't have adequate childcare to return to work. We saw women and minority workers once again suffer disproportionately. For those workers who are organized and represented by a union, they had someone in their corner throughout the pandemic. Unions fought for health and safety procedures, access to testing, and use of sick leave, always looking to make the workplace safer. With President Biden and Vice President Harris and Democratic majorities in Congress, we are moving towards recovery, and we are protecting and supporting all workers, from hotel workers to grocery store workers, longshoremen, farm workers, truck drivers, clerks, and technicians. You have all been on the front lines during this pandemic. Now, more than ever, we need to work together to move toward a future that is safe, productive, and equitable. You have a strong and effective leader in Donna Domingo who is practical, savvy, and follows through on your motto, an injury to one is an injury to all. I look forward to continuing my work in support of your ILWU Local 142 members. Thank you for your long-standing commitment to improve the lives of all working families in Hawaii. I will continue to be on your side. Right now, as this pandemic endures and the Delta variant spikes cases, we need to take care to get vaccinated and keep our families and our communities safe. Be kind and stay safe, everyone. Aloha.
We thank Maisie for that video. Next up, we have another video from Willie Adams, ILWU International President. We are pleased to show a video discussing the ILWU International Political Action Program from Brother Willie Adams, who is currently the ILWU International President and the previous ILWU International Secretary Treasurer. Willie Adams got involved with politics and the ILWU in 1998, becoming a member of Local 23's executive board and was an elected delegate to the ILWU Longshore Division Caucus. He served in both those positions until 2003, when he won a term on the International Executive Board. Representing the Puget Sound region in 2000 to 2003. Adams also served as a trustee on the International Union. In 2003, Willie Adams was elected the ILWU International Secretary Treasurer and served 5 consecutive terms until becoming the ILWU International President in 2018. And without further ado, please take a moment to hear what Willie Adams has to say on political action.
Good day, brothers and sisters and fellow workers of ILWU Local 142 in Hawaii. Congratulations on your state convention. Today, I want to spend a few minutes talking about the importance of political action. Just recently, about a month ago, Richard Chomka, the president of the American Federation of Labor, passed away. There's a lot of talk going around in Congress and all over the country. Where is the state of the American working class and of unions? Political action is so important in how we move forward and why we must donate to protect the rights of us as workers and that of our families. Just coming off the 2020 elections, let's take a look back. This year we are trying to get the PRO Act passed, which is so important not only to the workers in Hawaii, but to every division of workers in the ILWU. Also, the Jones Act is always at the forefront, which we must protect. The U.S. Senate passed a bipartisan infrastructure bill. It is in the House. It is so important that we get that infrastructure bill passed. It will provide jobs. It will take care of highways, ports, tourism, so many things that keep our economy going. And also I want to say that we are facing the midterms in 2022. We have a slight margin in the House and in the Senate. We must be able to raise money for new candidates that are running and those that have been with us and have walked in the future with us side by side with the ILWU and keep our interests at heart, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. So I'm asking you today to continue and that you will go in your pocket and let's continue to raise money. Let's continue to be a force. And as we mourn for the dead, let us continue to fight like hell for the living. God bless you in your endeavors. Wish you a great 142. God bless the men and women and other fellow workers of the ILWU Local 142. An injury to one is an injury to all.
Thank you, Willie. Next on the agenda, we have the educational video on COVID-19 and vaccines.
who is HMSA's Medicaid Medical Director and board-certified pediatric pulmonologist practicing at Kapiolani Medical Center. Dr. Wu has been involved in many COVID-19 pandemic efforts in Hawaii. But what you may not know is that he is originally from Oahu, completed his pediatric residency training at the University of Hawaii Pediatric Residency Program and his pediatric pulmonary fellowship training at the University of California, San Francisco. He also has a certificate in advanced training in clinical research from UCSF, and Dr. Wu serves as a voluntary assistant clinical professor at the University of Hawaii and is an advisory member for the Make-A-Wish Foundation and the Leahi Fund Committee. Welcome, Dr. Wu, and I'll go ahead and hand over the presentation to you. And Dr. Wu serves as a voluntary assistant.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And thanks so much, everybody, for taking some time of your day. I'm really honored to be able to go over some of this information. I just learned previously about the wide group of folks that are on this call, and really want to thank everyone for, serving all of your various functions and helping out our state. As everyone's known, our entire country is now open to vaccinations for folks 16 and up. This is at no cost to anybody, even if there is no insurance. The federal government is supplying these vaccinations. In some of the presentations I've given, it seems as it's been helpful to give a little bit of a background about how our immune system works. It gives a little bit of an appreciation for how the vaccines work and a better understanding of it. So folks may have seen this medical illustration. This is a picture of the virus that causes COVID-19 called SARS-CoV-2. I'm going to highlight these little red projections out here. Those are called protein spikes. And those protein spikes are very important for the virus. The virus actually infects human cells by using those protein spikes. So one way to think about those spikes are kind of like a key. In order for that virus to get into a human cell, that spike has a very specific shape that fits a very specific receptor on human cells. So think about that receptor in our cells like a lock. That key specifically fits that lock. And when that connects, that's how the virus actually lets itself into our cells to infect us. So it is the key for the virus to infect our cells. And the other important thing is these spikes are also the way that our immune system sees this virus to attack the virus. And you may have heard about a lot of different strains, mutations of this virus kind of going around. Those mutations are occurring in these spikes. So if that shape changes, it more easily infects us. If that shape changes, it may evade our immune system more easily. So all of the vaccines, or almost every vaccine right now, is targeting that protein spike. So once that virus gets into the cell, our human cell, that's how the virus actually replicates. So when a virus gets into our cell, it basically kind of opens up and then it releases its RNA. Think of RNA almost like a recipe to make more of the virus. So when it goes into our cell, it releases that recipe and it actually uses our own cells to make more of itself. So it's like our own cell's kitchen line or production factory will read the virus's RNA to make more of the virus. Once there's a bunch of viruses replicating in our cells, it then leaves our cell to go and infect other cells. So this is how the COVID-19 virus replicates and infects us. When the virus is outside of our cells, that's when our immune system actually has an opportunity to see this foreign invader and say, hey, let's kill this thing. So when the virus is outside of our cells, our immune system has different branches. Think about it like different branches of the military. We have a branch of our immune system called B cells. What the B cells do is they release something called antibodies. So you may have heard about this in the news. So think about those antibodies kind of like that key and lock. So remember, the way that that virus infects our cells is those protein spikes, those keys fit a certain lock on our cells to let itself in. Well, antibodies also are like a lock. They also specifically fit that key, that spike on that virus. And when it does that, it actually will block that virus from infecting our cells because it's kind of taking up space on that protein spike so it can infect us. And the other thing that happens when these antibodies connect to that virus is it actually tells other branches of the immune cell, of our immune system, hey, look at this virus. It sends T cells, another branch of our immune system, to go and eat and kill the virus. And then we have a third branch of our immune system, which is quite important. These are called our memory cells. So one of the memory cells is a memory T cell. And the memory T cell is important because if you get infected by this COVID-19 and then you get over it and later you get exposed again, what these memory cells do is they ramp up our immune system way faster because it's already seen it and tells the immune system to much more rapidly and efficiently kill this virus. And those memory T cells are actually what decreases the severity of the illness if you ever get exposed and infected again. The things we don't know though, if you got infected with COVID, is how long do you get protection for? So it seems that most people that got infected with COVID, you have protection for 6 months, but it kind of depends. As we get older, unfortunately, like other parts of our body, we don't work as well. Our immune system isn't as strong as you get older. So will your immunity last as long if you had an infection from COVID? We don't know. If your immune system is compromised, either from a health condition or medications, will you have long-lasting protection? Probably shorter. And what we also don't know is, let's say you were unfortunate enough to get COVID, but you were fortunate enough to have very mild disease. Will your protection last as long as somebody who had more severe disease? We don't know. We know that in SARS, which is another kind of coronavirus, those that had more severe disease had longer lasting protections than those that had mild disease. And the last thing is, we know, we're seeing this in Brazil, folks in Brazil that got COVID-19, they're now being exposed to a different strain and they're getting reinfected. So how good your immune system is from what we call natural infection for long-lasting protection, we don't know. So that's where vaccines come in. Vaccines truly are the light to the end of the tunnel. This is the way that we end the pandemic. We know much clearer how your immune system works from vaccines because people are getting a standard dose and it's being researched much more clearly. It's very hard to research mild disease versus severe disease. There's too many variables. So how do vaccines work? So all vaccines, they do the same thing. Vaccines are providing a safer way to build an immune response than getting the disease itself. It's basically trying to trick your body into thinking you had the infection without giving you the infection. And there's two different ways vaccines do this. So the traditional way that vaccines were made is you actually, in the vaccine, you get injected with a piece of the virus or a weakened or killed virus. So your immune system sees it to develop an immune response. So there's a vaccine that may be coming out soon called Novavax that uses this more traditional method. So they actually make that protein spike. So these little red projections are those protein spikes I told you about. They actually produce them in moth cells, the insect. So they infect moth cells and they harvest all these spikes and then they inject the spikes into somebody so that your immune system sees these spikes to develop the immune response. The second way that vaccines can work is the newer ways, where it actually gives instructions on how to make the virus into the vaccine, and then your kitchen line in your cells, your production factory sees this thing to develop the immune response. So here's kind of a picture of how that works. So the mRNA vaccines, so Moderna and Pfizer are two of the currently approved vaccines. They use this process. So here's that recipe, that RNA, and this is a recipe only to make that spike. It is not a recipe to make the virus. So you literally cannot get infected from the mRNA vaccine because it's only a recipe for the spike. So they inject that recipe into the body. That RNA then goes into our cells. Our body makes that spike and only that spike. That spike goes into our outside of our cells, so our immune system sees it to develop protection. It is true. This is the first time mRNA vaccines have ever been used in humans, and people are a little bit hesitant because they say, how did they make a vaccine using this new technology in less than a year? Well, mRNA, the technology behind mRNA vaccines has actually been in the work for decades. And if you remember something called SARS or Zika, thankfully, those never led to these huge pandemics like we are experiencing with COVID. They actually were about to release mRNA vaccines for these. And remember, SARS is a coronavirus similar to COVID-19 virus. So the technology has been studied for decades, and that's how they made these mRNA vaccines for COVID-19, building upon the experience that's been there for a long time. The other big important thing about mRNA vaccines is, remember, it's a recipe to make that spike. So if that spike changes and mutates, which we are seeing now, if there comes a time where that spike mutates so much that the vaccines don't work, well, we know the recipe. You just need to change the recipe and you can make a booster for another mRNA vaccine for it. So it's very easy to adjust. And the last thing about RNA is all animal cells make RNA. That our body uses that to make parts of us, to make proteins in our body. And it makes sense. We don't want to overmake a certain protein in our body. So RNA actually degrades super fast. So the mRNA vaccine, the stuff in it, goes away within hours to days. It doesn't stay in our body. It just goes in there, makes some spikes, our immune system sees it, and then all of it is cleared out of our body within hours to days. And other folks say, well, mRNA, that's going to change my genetics. So here's a bit of a description for why that doesn't happen. So if you've heard of DNA, if you remember the movie Jurassic Park, so DNA is like the cookbook for our body. It's a whole cookbook to actually make all the different parts of our body. Think of mRNA like a tiny little recipe or even an ingredient in that cookbook. So mRNA actually, when it gets vaccinated into us, it doesn't even go near that part of our cell that has our DNA, that has that cookbook. So in order for RNA to actually change our genetics, it would somehow have to go into that part of our cell called the nucleus. And then if you think about mRNA vaccine for COVID-19 as being in a different language, it would somehow have to go into our nucleus, get translated into the language of our cookbook, then somehow get inserted into our cookbook. That is, near impossible, which is why, all of the health experts, the genetic experts say that mRNA vaccines, it doesn't cause genetic changes. It's, infeasible for all of this to occur. The other vaccine that's out there is the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And you've also may have heard of AstraZeneca that's released in other countries. So that kind of works like the mRNA vaccine, but a little bit more indirect. So what they actually did is they put the recipe into a virus. Now, this is a virus that doesn't cause disease in humans, and it's actually altered so this virus doesn't replicate. And it basically injects a virus that has that recipe for that protein spike into our body, kind of like a Trojan horse. And then that virus infects the cell, co-infects the cell, it doesn't actually cause disease in us, and releases that recipe to make the spikes. So there actually is an FDA-approved vaccine using this. It's the Ebola vaccine. You may not have heard of that a lot because, thankfully we won't have widespread Ebola, but that actually is FDA approved for that since 2019. And we actually use this technology for other things, for things like gene therapy, they're using this. So these are the 3 vaccines that are currently approved under emergency use authorization. So a little bit of a tidbit on what EUA emergency use authorization is. So EUA actually started in 9/11. So the government really needed a way to fast track any kind of treatments, if there's bioterrorism or something, fast track it faster than the typical full FDA approval process, because you don't want people to die having to wait so long for the FDA approval process to work. So the main differences for EUA is, and the full FDA approval when we're talking about the COVID-19 vaccines, is for the EUA, you need at least 2 months of safety data for this. For the full FDA authorization, you need at least 6 months of it. Both of the approval processes, though, are done at the same amount of scrutiny. They are evaluating all of the data, with a fine-tooth comb, and it's very transparent. You can actually see the CDC Advisory Committee on Immunization. It's all public. You can see them going over all the information, the pros and the cons for it. So it's very transparent. So the reason why we have an EUA for not just the COVID vaccines, but all the COVID tests, those are EUA authorized. All the COVID treatments, the antivirals, those are all EUA authorized. The reason why I couldn't wait is, folks have heard, we've had 574,000 deaths. This is more deaths in all of World War II, Korean War, Vietnam put together and then some. So that's why this was fast-tracked for this. So Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Moderna, those are the mRNA vaccines. Johnson & Johnson is what we call that viral vector, that Trojan horse one. Pfizer, Moderna were approved in December, but remember, these already had to have at least 2 months of data in their clinical trials. So you can basically say that the 40,000 people were already done being followed by December. So now we're 6 months into the vaccines being used in a lot of people. The Pfizer and Moderna, those are 2 doses, 3 to 4 weeks apart. If you can't get it, exactly at 21, 28 days, you want to get it as soon as possible. You could, if things kind of get in the way, you can't get a vaccine or something else happens, you could get it 6 weeks apart. That CDC said that's, okay, it's ideal to get it closer apart. But if you go even farther than 6 weeks, you can still get it. It's just less clear how efficacious it would be as if you were to get it at the time recommended. The Johnson & Johnson is just 1 dose, and there are so many logistic benefits for this. If you're somebody who, really doesn't, like injections, 1 dose is ideal. For populations where it's very difficult to kind of get that second dose, let's say you're, work on a boat and you need to go out to sea and it's kind of hard to be back within that time frame. Or, for certain populations where you just can't get them back easily, 1 dose is ideal. All of the clinical trials required a large amount of people, enough people to determine safety, 30 to 40,000 people in all of the clinical trials for this. The Pfizer is the only one that's approved for 16 and above. The other are for 18 and above, but they're all studying children. Pfizer actually has already submitted for EUA expansion for 12 to 15-year-olds. So we're hoping to see that, hopefully quite soon. It was actually submitted in April. So we're hoping that the FDA, followed by the CDC, will review this, hopefully within the next month or so. But they're actually studying 6 months of age and higher now. So at the earliest, it's anticipated maybe fall for, the vast majority of children. It may be in early 2022 for all of the younger children, but time will tell. So far, though, the information from Pfizer and Moderna for the 12 to 15-year-olds is looking really good. The immune response for children, we know, is already better than adults. Like I told you, as we get older, we don't work as well. And the safety data seems just as good in the Moderna and Pfizer as the adult data. Johnson & Johnson, again, that got authorized a little bit later, so they just started studying their 12-year-olds and up. So, what vaccine should I choose if I had a choice between the three? So you may have heard about efficacy. So what does efficacy mean in regards to COVID vaccine? So let's say Pfizer, in their clinical trials, they said, they had 95% efficacy. So 95% efficacy does not mean that 5% of the people in their clinical trials got COVID. What it means is, in the clinical trial, those that got the vaccine compared to those that got placebo. So placebo is like they get a fake shot. So you're kind of, comparing if they got a shot versus they didn't get a shot. You have a 95% lower risk of getting COVID compared to if you didn't get the vaccine. So in other words, it's a 20 times less likely risk. So Pfizer, Moderna, 94, 95% efficacy for symptomatic illness. Now, the other thing I want to point out, because people are going to say, wow, Johnson & Johnson, 66% across the world in all of their sites, 72% in their United States site. Why is it so much lower? There's caveats to this. The definition of symptomatic illness actually varied a little bit between these vaccine clinical trials. And the other thing to remember is Johnson & Johnson started at a much later date than Pfizer and Moderna, where there are much more variant strains out there. Plus, Johnson & Johnson, their population that they studied actually was different demographically. They had more racially diverse population in their clinical trials than the Pfizer and Moderna. So it's not really apples to apples comparisons when we were talking about efficacy. So the big take-home message, though, isn't just necessarily how good are these vaccines at preventing symptomatic illness. Because, let's say you got COVID and you had runny nose, and that's it. Well, what's even more important? The take-home message is all three of these vaccines, even with the circulating variant strains out there at this time, are outstanding at preventing severe disease. In the clinical trials, Pfizer was 100% at preventing deaths and hospitalizations. Moderna, again, almost 100%, zero deaths. You can see zero deaths in all of the clinical trials. Now, it's true, in the clinical trials, those that got the placebo, that fake shot, there weren't a lot of deaths, but there were zero deaths in these. And again, all of them were amazing at preventing hospitalization. But these are clinical trials. What about the real world? So our real world evidence, it's amazing. The FDA put a bar of 50% efficacy. And even, the Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, Pfizer, they are way higher than 50% efficacy. And in the real world, the efficacy seems to be, almost more amazing than the clinical trials. So there is a US study in healthcare workers and first responders. So these are folks getting exposed to COVID all the time. And they looked at those that got vaccinated and those that didn't get vaccinated. And they actually tested them for COVID every week for 3 months. These are during kind of a lot of COVID going around, December through March. They tested them even if they didn't have symptoms. Those that got vaccinated had a 1 out of 1,000 chance of getting COVID with no severe disease in them. Those that were unvaccinated had a 161 out of 1,000 chance. That's more than 90% efficacy. Pfizer and Moderna, 6 months out in their clinical trials, they are still saying 90+% efficacy against symptomatic disease and 95% against severe disease. And you heard in the news this week, in those 65 and older, 95% plus efficacy at preventing hospitalizations. The vaccines with real world data are at least, if not better, than the clinical trials in terms of efficacy. Here's another graph that kind of shows it. So this is in Israel. Israel is one of the countries that were the first to vaccinate their population. So over here on our left side is December 2020. Over here is February 2021. So when we go up, that means how many people were getting hospitalized for COVID. This blue line are 60-year-old and higher in Israel. They were the first population that were getting vaccinated in Israel. So in Israel, they had Pfizer at the time. So in December, they were starting to give out Pfizer. Remember, Pfizer, you need 2 doses, right? So they were experiencing a surge in COVID during the holiday season. So the 60 plus year olds, they got Pfizer. So this is about a month later. You can see how drastically their hospitalizations in 60-year-olds and up dropped from the vaccination. Here's another picture to demonstrate that. We are incredibly fortunate in the US and in UK to even have access to the vaccinations. So over here, as we go up, is the number of new COVID cases per 100,000 people in the country. You can see that US and UK, we were having a lot of people infected with COVID. Over here is which country has given the most vaccines per 100 people. You can see US and UK, we've given the most per 100 people in our country. And you can see how our cases of COVID, this is January, this is April, you can see how our cases have dropped while all the other countries that haven't had the access to the vaccines have stayed the same, if not increased. What about side effects? So this is a quote from Dr. Shimabukuro in the CDC. He's kind of heading the vaccine safety monitoring in our country. He has stated that for COVID-19 vaccines, we have implemented the most intense safety monitoring in the history of the US. These COVID vaccines are being scrutinized at a level higher than almost anything else. These are all of the different systems that are there to monitor, are there any side effects occurring from these EUA authorized COVID-19 vaccines? So one of them is vSafe. So if you were to get vaccinated, you can voluntarily sign up to get these text messages, are you getting any symptoms? And you do this for weeks. I got vaccinated in December because, I see patients and I'm still getting these texts here and there just to make sure, have I had any side effects? So you can't actually determine causality from this method, but you can this is an early identifier, hey, is there anything kind of weird happening? So vSafe data. So again, we only have data for Pfizer, Moderna in the vSafe information I'm showing to you right now. We are accumulating it for Johnson & Johnson. We know that here's dose 1 of all of Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, here's dose 2. So we know you're more likely to get a side effect for your second dose than your first dose. So immunogenicity is a term we use for kind of your immune reaction to the vaccine. Remember, when you experience, headaches, fatigue, fever shortly after getting any vaccine, think about that as your immune system kind of responding to that vaccine. So remember, the vaccine is tricking your body into thinking you have the infection. However, if you don't get a reaction, I was lucky enough to only get an injection site, my arm was sore. I didn't get, my wife got fevers and stuff like that. She's in the DOE, so she got vaccinated. It doesn't mean that your immune system's not working. So if you don't experience a symptom, that's okay. That doesn't mean your immune system didn't work. But if you do experience symptoms, that's your immune system kind of responding to it. So, these mRNA vaccines, you can get about 50% of people develop fatigue after the second dose compared to 30% after the first dose. Almost half people got headaches, less than half got myalgia, about a third of people developed fevers, chills, joint pain, diarrhea, vomiting, abdominal pain was also experienced, not super uncommonly with it, but again, short-term for this. So what about Johnson & Johnson? What's all the, news about that? Well, again, the safety mechanisms in place for these COVID vaccines are incredibly intensive to identify any things that come up at all very early on. So Johnson & Johnson, remember, that started in February. That's when it got EUA authorized. So most of it actually was kind of going out in end of February, March. So, you know, within almost, you know, about a little over a month, the FDA paused Johnson & Johnson because they were getting these reports of something called TTS, which is thrombosis with thrombocytopenia. So what that means is thrombosis is blood clots. Thrombocytopenia is low platelets. So this is a really unusual combination to have. Platelets actually make your body clot. So to have clots and have low platelets is a bit unusual. And they actually had some very few cases reported of these blood clots occurring in the brain, which is, you know, very concerning. So they saw this and they paused this. We weren't seeing this with mRNA vaccines, but in the other countries that had another viral vector vaccine called AstraZeneca, they're also seeing clots. So there was a pause in this. So there were 15 cases out of 7.98 million doses of Johnson & Johnson where this TTS was identified. Unfortunately, there's 3 deaths that I think they're still confirming if it was due to TTS, but there's 3 deaths reported in somebody with TTS and got Johnson & Johnson. This is a risk of 1.9 out of a million. So why didn't they see this in a clinical trial? Because this is like almost like 2 in a million chance for this to occur. And you won't see this until it's widespread. This did occur all in women. I think there's recently one male that was seen with blood clots. The median age was, 37. There's some theories as to why. They think it's a very rare antibody response, which is more common in females of, under 50 years of age, more of childbearing age with it. But again, it's unclear. So if you're a woman and you're less than 50 years old, the chance for TTS to occur is higher than 2 in a million. It's 7 in a million. However, one thing to realize is blood clots in the brain is actually 5. If you actually were to get COVID, you actually are at high risk for getting clots as well. And to get blood clots in your brain just from getting the disease, the prevalence of that is 5 to 6 out of a million, higher than getting clots from a Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So the CDC, after they paused this and they reviewed all the data, they said, the benefits of the Johnson & Johnson, that in almost 2 out of a million risk, is way more beneficial to get the vaccine than the risk. However, if someone is a female less than 50, they should be made aware of this incredibly rare risk, 7 out of a million in that population. But it should still be given as an option for them, as one shot, if you're, okay to take that risk compared to the risk of getting an infection. So what's the benefit of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? If 1 million people got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, that would prevent over 2,000 less COVID deaths. If 1 million people got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, that would prevent 6,000 less hospitalizations. Again, less in that female less than 50 population, but still way lower risks than the actual disease itself. So any other serious side effects? So here's another safety monitoring system that our country has for side effects of the COVID vaccine. This one actually is connected to medical records through various health organizations across the country. So this is for the Mrna, Pfizer, and they are collecting this for the Johnson & Johnson. So, apart from that clot for Johnson & Johnson, so far, no other significant risks detected. And they've actually looked for all these other things. So there are folks with that are getting vaccines that get a blood clot in the heart. There are folks that get these vaccinations that get strokes. But when they looked at the medical information, it wasn't more than due to chance. Because everyone, unfortunately, people get heart attacks regularly anyways. So when they actually saw, was this due to the vaccine, all the information did not suggest that. So when people are getting, these Facebook posts, oh, I got the vaccine and then, I had this bad thing. When they reviewed and when they're looking and continuing to monitor this, it doesn't seem to be causal association. It was, it was just because people are at risk of getting those diseases anyways for it. Oh, the other thing I wanted to quickly mention is for every vaccine that's been out in history, almost every single serious side effect was identified within 2 months. That's why that 2-month period for EUA was recommended out there. So we are way past 2 months for the mRNA vaccines, and the safety continues to hold well for that. So what are actual contraindications where you shouldn't get the COVID vaccine? So if you've had a severe anaphylactic reaction to a previous COVID-19 vaccine, you shouldn't get that same vaccine. If you've had an immediate allergic reaction to an ingredient in the vaccine, and immediate means within 4 hours you get, itchy hives that's urticaria or kind of swelling in your mouth, your eyelids, or respiratory distress to an ingredient in it, and then you can go to the CDC to see what the ingredients are, or talk to their providers. You should not get the vaccine unless you get a consultation with the allergist immunologist who can then go through the details with you. But if you actually got, let's say, a Pfizer Moderna and you got this reaction, you actually could get the Johnson & Johnson, which is a completely different type of a vaccine. But again, consider it with consultation with your medical provider. Or what are precautions? So you can still get the vaccine, but let's say instead of when you get these vaccines, everyone gets monitored for 15 minutes. And every provider out there has to be prepared to handle any kind of allergic reactions that occur. But if you have a precaution, you will get monitored. That's what they're telling you, to wait there for 30 minutes. So precautions are if you've had an allergic reaction to other kinds of non-COVID vaccines or injectable therapies. So if you had like IV medications or shots and you've had a reaction, you should be monitored for 30 minutes. This is not a contraindication. You just get watched for a little bit more. This does not include allergy shots. So if you had a reaction to allergy shots, that's not a precaution. So another thing is if you've had anaphylaxis from anything else, you should also get monitored for 30 minutes. What are not contraindications or precautions? Well, if you've had allergies to foods or medications, or if you have a family history, you can get these vaccinations with no precautions at all. Again, if you're concerned, I'll talk to your provider. So what about those variant strains? So people say, hey, I want to wait until a better vaccine comes up for this. So remember those protein spikes? So this is kind of a medical illustration of what that spike looks like. So there's kind of two basic types of mutations. One kind of mutation is where it makes that spike more easy to infect the human cell. So it can be transmitted from one person to another, even easier. So one way to think about that spike is almost like a spear. So if you ever went spear fishing, so if the spike has just one prong, going to be a little bit harder to spear the fish than if the spike had 3 prongs. So some of those mutations are making that spike easier to catch onto that human cell. And then remember, that spike is also what our immune system targets to see and kill that virus. So remember, the antibody connects to that spike. So other mutations are occurring that may make our immune system not work as well, basically kind of blocking that antibody. So those are kind of the 2 mutations out there. Thankfully, again, though, the vaccines that are out there are very, very effective with the current mutations out there at preventing severe disease. It's true with some of the mutations, it may not protect as well against mild disease, but they are incredibly good at protecting death, hospitalizations, severe outcomes. The other thing about mutations to think about if somebody's deciding about getting the vaccine is Dr. Fauci, I'm going to say he's a rhyme master. He has preached viruses cannot mutate if they don't replicate. So can't mutate if can't replicate. So one way to think about this is, let's say you give a cook a recipe. So if you give one cook the recipe, they're bound to not mess up their recipe. They could if they keep cooking it over and over again. So if you give that recipe to a bunch of cooks, your likelihood of having one cook mess up that recipe is much higher. So that's how mutations in this virus occurs. Every time that virus replicates, it has a chance for that recipe to change and cause a mutation, which could potentially be a mutation so bad not even vaccines will work. We do not want that to happen. That's why we need the world to be vaccinated. And we start that with, our community. So when will I need a booster? So the other thing about this virus that's interesting is these are different viruses. So here's the MERS virus, here's the COVID-19 virus, and here's flu. So the higher the circle is, the faster that virus, the more likely that virus mutates. You can actually see that the COVID-19 virus actually doesn't mutate as much as the flu or even the SARS virus. But the reason why there's such a concern, again, is so many people are getting infected with this. So again, the more people vaccinated, the lower risk for variants. So how long till we reach herd immunity? And I'll go over what herd immunity means. So this is currently how many people our state programs have vaccinated, but we've actually have other federal programs. So we've actually given out 1.18 million doses in our state, which is great. We have almost half of our state, depending on the county, that have received at least one dose of the vaccination. So darkest, whatever color this is, bluish, aquish, got one dose, and this lighter one is 2 doses or full doses. And you can see, we did just open up recently to, 16 and up, but our older population has gotten more vaccines, but we need more to occur because of herd immunity. We have 1.4 million people in our state. We need estimated 70 to 90% to reach herd immunity. So remember, kids can't get vaccinated yet. They're not eligible. So for our community to reach 70 to 90% herd immunity, we need 86% of our 16-year-olds to reach this. And one of the companies has done polls. If we were to have everyone who says that they want to get vaccinated or on the fence to get vaccinated, we need all of them to be vaccinated to reach 86% herd immunity. What about immunity from those that have been infected? Our state has done great. We haven't had a lot of infections. We've only had 2% of our state with confirmed COVID. So that's why we need vaccinations to occur. So this is a little picture of how herd immunity works. In dark hexagon is people that were vaccinated. Red is people that got infected, and light is who hasn't gotten the vaccination. So here's 75% vaccinated, here's 5% vaccinated. And you're gonna see that red spread over time. And what you're gonna see is if you got vaccinated, it builds a wall to help provide it from spreading. Oops. That's how herd immunity works. Now, people say, well, I don't want to get vaccinated, let other people get vaccinated. Well, if you're in that, if you got exposed to somebody that got infected, you are still at risk. You can't count on other people getting vaccinated to protect you. And the other thing is, if we get vaccinated, there are people who can't get vaccinated for certain reasons. Let's say they're allergic to it. We need to protect other folks. So, one other thing to think about is not making a choice is a choice. Letting things happen by default is a choice. So choosing not to get vaccinated, not choosing to get vaccinated and just letting, things play out, you have to know what your risks and benefits are. So what's the risk for allergic reaction from Pfizer and Moderna is about 2.5 to 4.7 million per people. That's a little bit more than the flu, but similar to other vaccines. Your risk for anaphylaxis from taking antibiotics like penicillin are markedly higher, 200 to 400 per million. What's the risk of death from the vaccine versus the disease? So the Johnson & Johnson, again, there was 3 deaths out of 7.98 million people. That's 0.0000604%. what's the risk of death from COVID? If you were to add up everybody, all the age population, case fatality now in the US is 1.78%. So if you got COVID, overall in our population, it's this high. This is much higher than this. Again, there are over 500,000 deaths in our US, and 31% of them occurred just in the past 4 months. What's your lifetime odds of dying from a motor vehicle accident? It's almost 1%. Your risk of dying from a dog bite is 3,000 times higher in your lifetime than if somebody were to get this incredibly rare side effect from Johnson & Johnson. It's probably higher if you actually were around the dog. This is just in the whole population. So again, it's all risk and benefit. Long-term complications, well, to be determined for COVID vaccines, but what's your risk of long-term complications from the disease? You may have heard about long haulers. That's making its news. And it's kind of important, especially for younger folks who are saying, I'm not at high risk for complications for dying from COVID-19. We are finding out more and more about this. It is now estimated at 10 to 30% of people that get COVID-19, even if they have mild symptoms, are at risk of having long COVID. So what that means is several weeks after recovering from the illness, they're experiencing symptoms. You know, there's a study in athletes that had heart disease. These are college athletes that had heart abnormalities even with mild COVID-19 disease. And you may have heard, you know, Senate Democratic Majority Leader retired recently because after experiencing mild COVID, now has what he calls brain fog. And he kind of quotes, it's like the day after a really bad hangover. He had mild disease and now he's struggling to function with just simple cognitive functions like organizing folders. And there's also a thing about vaccines. There's actually people that have long COVID that after they've been vaccinated, they're actually experiencing decrease. This isn't for all, and it's really interesting in how this works. The other thing is, remember, we cannot be complacent. Sure, things are getting better. People are getting vaccinated, but we haven't had enough. I'm a pediatric pulmonologist, and like everyone, you know, it really hits home. You know, we had our first pediatric death. It was a visitor, but kids can't get vaccinated yet. We need to protect them by getting vaccinated for this. So what some people say, let me wait and see. Well, there's been, this is, I think, from a couple of days ago. If people are waiting for more people to get vaccinated, the things that could be said is, well, many months have gone by. Most, you know, significant adverse effects from vaccine would have already been observed. We have over 141 million people that have been vaccinated, almost 100 million that have been fully vaccinated. Not sure how much more people could be vaccinated to wait for. You know, what are the benefits of getting vaccinated? Again, besides preventing you from getting the disease in the first place and preventing against severe disease? Well, after 2 weeks of completing the vaccine series, the CDC says now that, well, you can safely, you know, quite safely be around other vaccinated people without mask and distancing. Or you can be around, let's say, a relative in another household. Let's say they couldn't get vaccinated yet. Well, if they aren't at high risk for complications from COVID, you still potentially could spread COVID or get infected with COVID from the vaccine. Your likelihood of it is incredibly low. Remember, no vaccine is 100%, but these are 90+% effective. You could be around other people with it. Outdoors, you just heard that if you are in small gatherings, outdoors, you know, may not need to wear a mask. Again, you do have to kind of follow state regulations as well, and your job regulations, you know, your business regulations as well for it. And, you know, the CDC says with traveling, you don't, you know, necessarily need to test or quarantine. But again, you know, that's not necessarily true for our state. We do need to make sure that and verify people are getting quarantined, which a lot of work is being done. And the other thing is, if you've been vaccinated, fully vaccinated, and you're around somebody that is sick with COVID, you don't need to quarantine. That is how good the data is so far for this. You don't need to quarantine if you don't have symptoms. If you have symptoms, you should get tested because again, the vaccines aren't 100%. So, what's the risk? The age-old question, why did the chicken cross the road? Well, obviously the chicken was doing risk-benefit calculations in the chicken's head. So what's the benefit versus the risk? It helps prevent from getting COVID. It's a safer way to protect you than getting the disease itself. And, we live in a state where we call folks that aren't related to us, blood related to us, auntie-uncle. Why is our state so good at having the least number of cases of COVID? It's because we look out for each other. We wear masks around each other. Vaccinations are the way, not just to protect us, but to protect our friends, our family, our coworkers, our community for it. In the meantime, though, again, wear masks, even if you're vaccinated, because you don't know who hasn't been vaccinated. Watch for COVID symptoms. These vaccines aren't 100%, but they're 90+%, and they're amazing, outstanding at protecting severe disease. And obviously, still have to follow kind of workplace guidance, and OSHA does have guidance out there. So, there are different spectrums of the vaccination thoughts. There are people who will refuse to get the vaccines whatsoever, or no matter what. It's fine. Everybody has their thoughts behind it, but we don't want to be combative. We want to be there and open to take questions, to provide facts, not untrue facts. There are people that are in the middle that are hesitant, and there are people who want the vaccine and they probably got the vaccine because it's available to get appointments out there now. So one way to think about, the folks in the middle is, if you've not ever known anybody who had a lot of confidence about things, but they didn't have a lot of information to back their confidence. So this is kind of a method called the Dunning-Kruger Effect. So when you don't know a lot, sometimes your confidence is high. Then when you start learning more and more about it, your confidence isn't as high because you realize how much you don't know. Then as you learn more and more about it, then your confidence really increases. And that's the goal for providing facts for folks that are on the fence, or even that folks that are not aware, providing that information so that you can make an educated decision about whether or not to get the vaccine. So, what are important messages out there that can get somebody on the fence to, reconsider? So this is a study that went out. It said that, 66% of people, if they hear that vaccines are 100% effective or near 100% effective at preventing hospitalization deaths, they will get the vaccine. Half of people who hear that the vaccine technology isn't new, we've actually been working on this for decades, they could change their mind. Now, I know these slides are going out, and I apologize, I'm kind of taking a little bit too long, but these are just different things that could potentially change people's perceptions and have them consider getting the vaccines. So, long-term effects may not be completely known, but the long-term effects of COVID-19 could be worse. And the statistics show your risks are markedly higher from the disease than from the vaccine. That can also get them to change their mind as well. And the other thing, remember, is almost all vaccines, the history of vaccines, we've seen the bad side effects occur within 2 months. And we are now 6 months into the vaccine clinical trials going out and 4 months into the real world vaccines going out. So other interesting motivators, if the vaccine was easily available, they would get it. If they could travel without all of the, mask, if they could travel without being quarantined, that would also get them to change their mind. Again, we want to overcome fatigue with truth from trusted individuals. The messenger is just as important as a message. Somebody you trust that gives you information, you may take that with more weight than somebody you don't know, who may be giving factual information. So this is a goal, just to provide the facts for this. Lead with empathy. You want to understand where everybody's coming from both sides. And again, emotional triggers are important. 1 out of 5 people in the US know somebody who died from COVID. My uncle died from COVID. He didn't have any high-risk conditions for it. So, there are great resources in the CDC and the Hawaii Department of Health for information, for factual information for this. And I do, use this quote a lot. No snowflake in an avalanche ever feels responsible. This pandemic has shown how interconnected we are in many different ways. So our decisions to do the vaccine and our decision to not do the vaccine influences not just ourselves, but everyone else as well. So all three vaccines are highly effective. Vaccines are safer than COVID risks. Masks, distancing can fight the pandemic, but vaccines, as soon as possible, will end that pandemic. We don't want new variants to come out that will make vaccines not work and make the virus deadlier. So where can you go to find information? So vaccinefinder.org, you can actually go there, see what's available at the retail sites. This doesn't have the county sites, and it actually will tell you what kind of vaccines are available in those sites. And hawaiicovid19.com also has the county sites as well. Thank you so much.
Okay. Hope that was very educational for everyone. And I know there's some people that requested the video, and that can be shared. Okay. So just let us know and we'll get that to you. In regards to the general session, we're now going to recess until tomorrow morning at 9. However, we do want to start up our committees at 11 o'clock. So general session reconvene tomorrow at 9. We're in recess right now, and committees to start at 11. Thank you.